back in that way. Also, you are requested to wear face covering when you're moving around areas of the building. There's no fire alarm scheduled for this evening. If the fire alarm does sound, we need to vacate using the marked exits, and the congregation point is to the rear of the building and exchange flags. Toilets through that exit on downstairs, or accessible toilets further down the corridor. If you're invited by the chair to speak, can you please use the microphones and turn any mobile devices to silent, please? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Can I just welcome everybody this evening to this meeting? And I believe it's going to be live streamed. Can we note apologies have been submitted by Councillor Nick Small, and we have Councillor Alan Gibbons attending as his alternate, Councillor Barbara Mace, Fiona Waddington, Mark Bousfield and Melissa Campbell. Are there any further notifications of apology? Thank you. Can I invite any declarations of interest from members and officers, please? Great. Right, we'll go to item 3, which is minutes of the last meeting. Can I refer the committee to pages 1 to 8 and in the agenda pack for the meeting that was held on the 4th of August. I do have one point I want to raise on page 5, which was, I'm assuming everybody has read these, by the way. Do people need me to go through it page by page? No. On page 5, I note the task and finish group to look at mental health and well-being in schools aligned with the COVID-19 pandemic. It says members Councillor Linny Hinnigan and others determined by email. I actually think it was Liz Makinson who's emailed me about this today, and possibly Barbara Mace, who's not actually present this evening, to confirm that. But Linny has confirmed that she had volunteered to be on the employment and skills. So we have a situation where we have one, possibly 2 people on the mental health scrutiny panel, and we would need some extra volunteers for that. Do any of the members present want to volunteer for that? Billy, thank you. Anybody else? No. We'll try and find more members by email for that one. Other than that, the only other thing I'd draw attention to is the retirement of Peter Fay. I think when the papers were originally published, it didn't have our thanks on the end, and I'm pleased to see they've been reinstated. Our thanks to Peter Fay, who was the Secretary and employee of the Council for 44 years. Right, let's move on. We have, at item 4, some submitted questions. Peter, have these been circulated, please?
Yes, Chair, they've been circulated to everyone and they will be appended to the minutes.
I personally just have one question about the questions which I read this afternoon, is that it does not say on the paper who actually sent the questions. Do we have an answer for that?
Chair, it was from Sen Crisis, Liverpool.
I don't know, members, because I don't think all members had sight of the questions before the meeting. Do you need a couple of minutes to look at them? Are you happy with the responses? Right. Are there any questions arising from those questions? Are we okay? Okay. Sorry, Angela, could you use your speaker, please? I propose, because I've made a mistake, as always, we haven't done any introductions, so while people are looking at those questions and responses, can we also start to introduce ourselves? I want to start on the left, on the back row, and if we can just say who we are.
Councillor Liz Makinson, Church Ward.
Councillor Billy Lake.
Councillor Lenny Hennigan, Cressington Wards.
Angela? Councillor Angela Coleman.
Councillor Kimberly Berry.
Councillor Lola Bennett.
Thank you. Jill, if we could start at the back row.
Jill Roberts, Morgan Sindall Construction.
Rob Tabb, Liverpool City Region Combined Authority.
And one.
Hi, Amina Almi.
Tracy Gore.
Paul Sheppo, Liverpool Chamber of Commerce.
Jonathan Jones, Director of Education.
Elaine McCausland, Employment and Skills Team City Council.
Chris Price, School Improvement Liverpool.
Steve Reddy, Director of Children's Services.
And Councillor Tom Logan, Cabinet Member.
Right, that means we can move now on to the Cabinet Member update. Can I refer committee to the pages 9 to 13 of the agenda pack and call on Councillor Tom Logan to speak to his report, and we'll take questions after that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I won't spend a long time speaking. Everyone's seen the report, but there is a couple of things that I wanted to highlight or bring attention to. Firstly, we spoke last time about work we can do to assist councillors in working with and building relationships with their local schools. I sent an email out about this a couple of weeks ago about having councillors attend, if they wish, a meeting where Paul who chairs the Primary Heads Association is also on board and thinks it's a really good idea. So we can just carry those discussions on and focus primarily on building a good relationship with schools, but also about what to do with complaints and stuff like that, just so local councillors know exactly how to work with the local schools. Nick and Angela and Lilla got back to me saying they would really be willing to attend that meeting, which is great. If anyone else, that's not loads of people, sorry if you've replied and I missed your email, but if anyone else wants to, just drop me an email and we'll arrange a date and time with Paul to start them discussions. The next thing I wanted to mention was around COVID. We will have a bit more detail later on as a report in the agenda, but I just wanted to draw attention to that this is a very difficult time for lots of parents. The government's decided that it's business as usual, but we all know COVID hasn't actually gone away. There is mitigations being put in place where spikes pop up across the city, and actually last week we had 11 schools with additional mitigations, and there is rolling day to day quite a large number of pupils isolating, but nothing like what we saw before when whole bubbles were having to isolate. That's good in terms of kids being in school and learning like they need to, but it's not great for families where 6 months ago they were told you've got a really vulnerable a health condition that makes you really vulnerable, so no one from your house can leave the house. Now they're being told, well, your kids have got to go to school, it doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? That's a very difficult position for parents to be in. And we are trying to work with them parents to support them parents, and at the same time, some of them parents are being told that attendance of the kids isn't good enough, etc., etc. And it is difficult. What we are seeing is that numbers in schools are reducing, so mitigations are being put in place, seem to have been working. So they did grow, steady off a bit, and it seems that numbers day to day are reducing in schools, which is a really good sign. But as I said, we'll get a bit more information about that later on. I wanted to mention about SEND as well. We've got a big report, another report later on about SEND and what we're doing to turn things around in our SEND provision and how we support SEND pupils. The message very much is that we've done loads, but there's still quite a long way to go. And it's quite a difficult message to get that across sometimes, because a lot really has been achieved, but the situation for many parents is still very frustrating. So we are trying to be very careful how we deliver that message. I had a really good conversation with the representatives from Liverpool, and they did also comment. They're often strongest critics, commented that the pace of improvement really has increased over the last couple of months, which is great. But everyone agree on all sides agrees we've still got quite a long way to go. But improvements have been made. And then the last thing I wanted to bring attention to, again, this is mentioned in my report, but we have it. It's very something that has become very important to me. We've got a few big projects coming up, redevelopment projects. We've got stuff happening with Little Woods, hopefully, the new Everton football stadium, and other smaller projects that will always be ongoing in a city such as Liverpool. I'm very keen that the workforce that provides the labour for those projects is sourced locally. That's one step, and that's been on the agenda for quite some time. What I want to make sure happens is that actually, this is something I've spoken to Jane Corbett about as well, and we're going to be working, hopefully working with Preston City Council on how they've started to do this, is that for the life of the project, the labour is sourced locally and supply chains are kept locally where possible, and not just for the regeneration. It's great if we've got a building going up and everyone working on that building is as local as possible, but then what is the building for, and who's going to be employed in that building for the lifetime of the building? In Preston, the reason I'm looking to work with Preston City Council is because of they've announced recently that they're bringing together an employment and skills pledge to hold developers, try and hold developers to the promises that they make around local labour. Because in the past, what often happens is during lease discussions and during planning discussions, developers say, yeah, we'll use these people, we'll do this, this and this, and it doesn't always happen. And it's quite difficult actually, apparently, it's quite difficult to hold developers to account. But Preston are making some gains in that and using the planning process as to strengthen what they're trying to do. So I'm trying to pull together a meeting with the leader of Preston Council, who I've spoken to about it, is completely on board, and the director of housing and the cabinet member for planning, and then relevant officers from our side as well. That's in the pipeline. We haven't got a date yet, but that's going to happen. And as I said, I think that's particularly important now, because we're on the verge of some genuinely ginormous projects starting in the city that could make a real difference to the areas that they are situated in. What will be horrific, it will be terrible if we use Little Woods as an example. If that develops into turning Liverpool into the Hollywood of the North and becomes a digital hotbed, it's prime location for people coming straight down the M62 and working there every day, which the city needs, but we also need people who live locally, live in that area, to be able to access those jobs. Already starting discussions as well with schools about how we can get our local children in the position to be able to access those jobs as well. Then separate for that, there's a whole other angle that we haven't really started the work on yet, but we're looking at how to develop green jobs in the city, and actually in the city region. It's one of Joanne's priorities in terms of a portfolio in Liverpool City region, about making the Northwest and Liverpool City region in general the place for green jobs. What that looks like, I couldn't tell you right now, but that's high on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Member. Questions? Lynnie, Lilla, Liz, Alan, Kimberly. Okay, we'll start with Lynnie. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Tom, for your report. And it's great to hear you be really honest about the SEND stuff, because, you know, I appreciate that there's been loads of improvements, but to be honest and say that we've still got loads to do is really important. One of the things which might be good, if, because I've met with LivePack and they are very honest, aren't they, as parents? And I think when you look at the figures, and obviously we're getting it from our constituents in terms of frustrations from parents, it might be good to have LivePack here, you know, just for them to come and address a committee to sort of say how it is from their point of view as parents and what they do. Because I know, you know, I met with them and with my frustrations, but I think it might give good context to how, you know, bad it was and how good it is now, but what else from a parent's point of view we've got to do. So that's a suggestion. And also just in terms of the kickstart stuff for the apprenticeships, is there any way? I recently met with an employer in South Liverpool who basically has been trying for 4 months to get kickstart apprenticeships, and he said, you know, it's the paperwork. He said, I said, well, I don't know who it is within the council, but you know, I'm going to take that. He said, it almost makes it not worth the trouble. And, you know, and he seemed really genuinely on board with it. You know, I was speaking to him about care leavers and was like pushing, you know, and he was like, yeah, you know, I'll do it. But he was, you know, them jobs are £20,000 data, you know, his import and export. It was a haulage company, quite a big company, but established for 30 years. And he just said, you know, I'm committed to taking young people, but I feel like I'm banging my head against a brick wall because of the red tape when it comes to the, so if there's any way that can be simplified in terms of how we get these, because it's great having all these big projects on board, but if that's just a small employer in South Liverpool who are thinking to walk away because of the red tape, he can't get them through the door. He said, you know, he's got 4 jobs there, he's been pushing it and hasn't got anywhere. So just if that can be taken on board, because we don't want the big ones to come along and then our kids miss out.
Thanks, Lee. I know Elaine will be able to share it. So we actually struggled for a long time in terms of the council as an employer to become authorised as a kickstart employer ourselves, which we are now. I know Rob might want to come in on this, because I know I've spoken to other employers and training providers who have throughout the kickstart journey, shall we say, have been meeting regularly. I don't know if you were running that meeting, Rob, or you were just in a meeting that Rob was involved, kind of like a kickstart, kickstart problem solving group with people from all across the sectors. So if they're still having troubles, I'm pretty sure that group's still going, isn't it? If we can link them up. Yeah.
If I may, Councillor Logan, I think it's a very strong point, Councillor Logan. There's the kickstart process has been fraught with difficulties from the very start. We've tried to help Department for Work and Pensions design it based on our experience and based on the experience of people like Elaine and Julia and others within Liverpool in work. It'd be fair to say that if we'd been designing it, it would be an awful lot more simple than it is now. And I think you see that in terms of the local programmes that are delivered, particularly through Liverpool in Work, and they're an awful lot easier for employees to get on with. That the story that you share is one we've heard from many, many people, many employers who've said, I'd love to get involved, but it's just too complicated. We keep making the point to DWP, the Metro Mayor, Mayor Anderson and Naseef Hamid, as chair of the LEP and the ESB, have written to the Secretary of State twice in recent weeks on this to highlight this and to give them some practical suggestions. Just a shame that DWP aren't in listening mode on this one.
Thanks, Rob. Did you have any more to say, Tom? Could I just add on the LivePack invite? I think it would be really good, given the standing item on the agenda, if perhaps they could just come along just to give a verbal, not a presentation, just to be here to say firsthand that they are finding that the case. You know, I'm just cognizant of all these questions here from Send Crisis and stuff that goes around on Twitter. And I know LivePack do good work, but they are on the ground, and I think it would be nice for members to hear what they've got to say, maybe 5 minutes or something, just a verbal. Thank you. Lula?
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Tom. Thanks for your report. I've just got 2 questions, really. One of them is probably a joint one and then a separate one. I noticed on your report about De La Salle, and I don't know, you said it may, the position may be clear this evening, and also on page 11 about pupil places, and that we'll have a shortage of Year 7 places in 2023-24, between 300 and 400 places, and an announcement that there may be a free school, because I know the government has given the clearance for that in 2024. The questions is that they laugh at each other, don't they? Really, you know, we're closing an absolutely brilliant school in the north of Liverpool, which has got places available for, you know, in 23 and 24, and then having those the shortfalls, and then the government announcing a free school to open in the north of Liverpool. Do we know anything about, first of all, that new school, that free school? Whereabouts is it being built, or is it De La Salle? And what's happened with De La Salle? Have you got any further information? That's my first question. I might as well just give you the both of them right now. And my second question was on, you know, the building pathways to employment, and the new, obviously, you know, the new Everton Stadium, and you know, the pop-up film studio, well, that might come permanent, or whatever, you know, Film of the North. There was a scheme that was run within, you know, Knowsley Council. Well, in fact, I think it was right across the whole of Merseyside, called Fusion 21. I'm not sure whether you're ever aware of Fusion 21. But it was very similar to what you were talking about. So there is information there, because I worked on that. I was, you know, one of the people who worked with the Department of Work and Pensions, and employers, you know, construction employers, right across, you know, the whole occupational areas of construction, you know, from painters and decorators to, you know, other type joiners and stuff like that. So I think that information should still be around, and I'm sure Rob is probably aware of Fusion 21 as well. So there is information there as well. That I don't know whether that's similar to what Preston are doing. I'm not sure about. I haven't read that bit yet. So maybe it's something you'd want to go back and have a look at too. Cheers.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually, when I've been talking to Joanne about it, she did speak about Fusion 21. So yeah, I'm sure we'll be exploring that as an option. With De La Salle, we haven't got any more information. I'll let Jonathan comment on when we might hear. The thing with closing one school and opening another school in potentially a similar area is what's a more appropriate way of saying piss take? Like, I don't know. Like that's the situation. It's, if you're sitting in London looking at the school numbers, you say, well, if we open this school, that helps with the numbers. If we close this school, it's not full, it'll be all right. But that's a complete disregard for the effect it has on the kids who are at school now, if that makes sense. But also doesn't actually meet the shortfall, and that was the point that I made. So working with Anthony Lavelle, who is the Councillor Anthony Revell, who is the chair of governors of the school, and talking to the school, the submission I made to the Regional Schools Commissioner was based on pupil places and the fact that we are already looking at a shortfall, even with De La Salle being open, even with the new school opening, we're still going to be short of places. So we really need you to not close this school, was the argument. Whether they listen to that, we're still waiting to find out. We haven't had any more. I haven't had any more information about the final decision. I was just going to mention something. Oh, and the school that has been given the green light to open is the same multi-academy trust that run King's Leadership, which is in Dingle, which used to be Shorefields, and the location is not known yet. But where we need places, most secondary places, is in the north of the city. So when we come to making a final decision, we will be looking as a council to put it in the north of the city, because that's where there's the biggest shortfall for places, which is where they're closing the school. It's hard to make it make sense, put it that way.
Happy with that? Yeah. Thanks. Liz, can we take your question, please?
Thank you, Chair. Mine's just a very quick thing, really, that you mentioned that COVID numbers are reducing in schools. Is that across the board, or is that in those schools that have taken on additional mitigations against COVID?
I don't know. I was only commenting on the overall numbers. I don't know if Chris wants to.
We're seeing that across the board at the moment. So since about the 21st of September, we've started to see a decline in primary schools, a lot sharper than secondary schools. So secondaries have been described more as a plateau than a decline, but it's starting to demonstrate that it will go in that direction.
Thanks. Thank you.
Alan, please.
Yep, obviously, that's a result in the that we shops, those sort of relate.
And I'm quite keen for that to be the leading thought of that work, is to actually get in and build a good relationship before you have to turn up with a complaint. Because we are often the people that, as local councillors, we're the people that people go to with a complaint. When it's schools, it's often when they're unhappy with how a previous complaint has been dealt with. So it can be quite a difficult conversation. If you already have that relationship, as you described, and it can change things completely. And as I said, I'm quite keen that that'll be what we lead off with in that work. The UCU strike, the only update I've got is that they've had the first day of strike last week or the week before. They're out this week on Wednesday and Thursday, and I'm pretty sure they emailed all councillors about that. And they said things are getting nasty, so all the support they can have. I don't know, I haven't had time to follow up what exactly is meant by that, but that was the word used. Things are getting nasty, so all the support we can give them, they'll really welcome it. So Wednesday and Thursday morning this week.
Kimberly, please. Thanks.
Thank you. It's just a brief point about the guidance for councillors and engaging with schools. I'm sure it's going to be really welcomed by a lot of members, not just new members, but existing members. Just quickly, would you envisage separate guides for primary schools and secondary schools, or do you think it'd be more general than that, or is it a little bit too early to say?
Yeah, it's too early to say. I think I have my own personal thoughts on it, but I also know that there's some wards that won't even have a secondary school in them. Do you know what I mean? So I think for the primary will be the, well, we'll see. I'm happy to have that conversation. Come to when we have the meeting and we'll talk about it.
Any more questions? No. Can I just say on that one, Cabinet Member, I think one of the best things councillors can do is be a school governor, to build a relationship with schools and understand how they operate from the inside out, if you like. And I think once you get that understanding, it's easier to approach other schools. It's just one of my thoughts. And the other one I wanted to raise, if you don't mind, is the legacy of the task force that you mentioned. Would it be at all possible for Tracy to bring a report to the November meeting on the outcomes of the task force? Because she has reported at milestones, but we haven't heard any of the final recommendations. Thank you.
I'm sure that'll be fine, and we're expecting. I mean, Tracy, you've officially finished now, haven't you? So we are at the stage of tying things off. So in terms of education, anyway, from the task force. So.
Education, employment and skills, Tracy, is that right?
Yes, the employment skills report is also completed. It hasn't been sent in yet, but it has been completed now. So yeah, and I'd be more than happy to come and present both reports.
That'd be brilliant. Thank you both. Right, we're bringing item 9 forward now. Supporting young people and adults into employment, and this is on pages 35 to 43 of the pack. Can I invite Elaine to provide an overview of the report, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to go through the full report, but just to say that this is an information report for the committee, which provides an overview of the work of the City Council in terms of its support for young people, adults, businesses and employers in terms of helping them into work or supporting workforce sufficiency for their businesses. So just to say that this work is very much rooted into the city plan, and it's also part in aims 2 and 4, and it's also, which is really what I want to try and highlight through this report tonight, the connection between education and employment, because it's also part of priority 5 of the education improvement plan, and that's a priority that I lead on. So I'm connecting the education and the school side into the post-16 and employment and support and so on. So wanted to really try and emphasise that in terms of the report. I also hope that it gives you a flavour of the breadth and the reach of the work that the City Council does around employment. A lot of council departments support employment, as you can see from the report, and it's almost that we've adopted a whole organisation approach. There's, you know, as always, there is so much work that we can continue to do and need to do, and I'll touch on that a little bit later on in the conclusions, I guess, from the report. But if I just take you over to just touch on the work that we're doing, which connects education and employment, because it's really appropriate for this committee to see that work. It is in its infancy and its early days, so just to say that, but there's lots of really good stuff that this priority, some of the actions, some of the outcomes that we hope we will achieve. So for example, on page 36 of the report, you can see that we've employed a new member of staff who is going to lead taking forwards a talent pipeline connecting schools, businesses and employers together, and with the view of that being more systematic, with a view to it being rolled out and scaled up. So it's early stages, but that individual reports to me and we are developing that role to take that work forwards. You can see also on that page that we're just about to commission, we're just about to appoint some consultancy, which will, for I guess over the next 3 months, we will undertake an evaluation
of schools post-16 provision, sixth form provision, because we want to really try and take a look at that through the lens of the young person, so that we're getting a really good view of how appropriate the curriculum is, the qualifications, in terms of that really preparing the young person for the next stage of their life in terms of lifelong learning, post-16 training, education, vocational qualifications and work. So we think that work will take around about 3 months. I'm sure that people within the committee here will get involved in that. We will take your views as part of that consultation and evaluation, and that piece will make some recommendations for action going forwards. So that's a big piece that we're really looking forward to. Another piece that I'm really pleased to sort of share with you, and very keen to continue to update you as we move forwards with this one, is an employability test and learn. Now, we've talked this evening about pathways to employment, and that this test and learn is that. It's testing out through 12 secondary schools, including a couple of special schools within there, looking at a model where we can pull together and cohere the existing resource that is already in schools around careers and around employability, work experience, and we want to try and link that to employers, and we've got some employers in the room tonight, to test out a really scale-upable model that we can roll out. Now, the City Council's got an influencing role, a strategic influencing role, so that's one of the things we're really trying to push on through this test. So we will evaluate it, and we will look at using that then to scale up a pathways to employment model that, you know, schools can work to, and we will look to support them with that. So we're really, really pleased about that, and as I say, I'd be really keen to carry on and update you as we move forwards with that one. The rest of the report in terms of the employability, schools and employability side, focuses on the work that we're doing to support the reduction of NEET. You can see from the report that our NEET figures a couple of years ago were 12.8%, way over 1,000 young people. We have reduced that down. It's still not good enough. It's not low enough, but we're currently at 7.8%, and that was around the June period in the summer. And there are lots of interventions. We lead a NEET reduction group, so that is very much a partnership approach to supporting NEET reduction work. Other examples that I've put in there are the work that the City Council does around its regeneration scheme. So Denford, the housing scheme, is a really good example of that, where we have Lovells, who's the contractor, and again, it picks up on what Cabinet Member was talking about earlier on around ensuring that the regeneration schemes, it's not just about bricks and mortar and big builds, but it's about people, and it's about young people, and it's about giving our young people as much exposure to work experience, apprenticeships, traineeships, you know, working on site as much as possible, and being really ambitious about that, you know, about, you know, very, very professional level jobs as well as entry level jobs through those schemes. So we're very pleased to say that the Denford scheme is creating some apprenticeship opportunities, and also we have a pre-employment scheme that is delivered in partnership with Lovell and the City of Liverpool College. So again, it's an example of where we're really using the regen schemes to do that work, and with the schemes the Cabinet Member mentioned earlier on, we will again look to maximise them as much as possible. If we move on to the second bit of the report, which talks about, I guess, more of a whole organisation approach to employability, you can see there that I've tried to put in some really tangible examples for you as committee members of the work that we're doing to support employment. You can see that we're linked into regen really well. There's more work to be done there, and I've cited some of the big projects there that, again, we are working with our regen colleagues, and I suppose it's an inclusive growth approach to make sure that we maximise employer obligations around creating employability opportunities. But there is more work that we need to do, and some tangible examples of that are the use, for example, of Section 106 or the Community Infrastructure Levy. I've seen in other councils where they've used some of that resource to create employment opportunities, create posts. So Bristol Council is an example of that, where I've been in touch recently about how the types of things they're doing, and I'm keen to find out as well other examples across the country of where there's more of that going on. So we're really keen to continue to talk to our regen colleagues about really maximising that as we move forwards. Some other examples again that we are working on, which are more around the workforce sufficiency side. At the previous select committee, those of you who are here, we talked about real crises in the care sector, in hospitality, in logistics. You've probably heard it on the news. And I've tried to put into the report some tangible examples of the work that we're doing with employers to help around workforce sufficiency. Again, we talked at the last committee about the work that we're doing around reducing reoffending. There's a system change group, and again, I've put in on page 38 in the report the work that we're doing there around really supporting ex-offenders coming through the justice system, helping them to gain employment or meaningful training as they come through the system. And one of the examples of that is around potentially creating a social enterprise opportunity through an existing laundry facility that they have within the prison site. We've also supported the prison to improve and refurb their workshops, where they do a lot of training for the men at HMP Liverpool. So again, that's an example of where we're trying to support, and improve. They are potentially a supply for workforce at the moment. They can move. They're readily available to move into work. So we're actively trying to support employers to give them the confidence to take on an ex-offender. So there's lots of examples in the report there for you to see. We've mentioned Kickstart this evening, and again I've put some figures in there around the work that we've done around helping young people gain a Kickstart, which is a work placement opportunity. And again, that's in there. And again, we're working with our people and talent officers in the other council departments to create council work placements as well. It has been difficult. We've touched on that this evening, and Rob's talked about it, but we've got there now. And we're actually working with Job Centre Plus in the Duke Street Job Centre at the moment, where we've called it a Kickstart takeover, where we're weekly encouraging young people to work with their work coaches to encourage them to take up Kickstart opportunities. So I hope that gives you lots of tangible examples of the work that the council is doing. I've also highlighted some of the key issues that we do face as well, and you can see that on the bottom of page 39 of the report. We do have workforce sufficiency issues, but again, there's lots of things that we're doing to try and support employers and businesses around that. And again, I've highlighted where we do have some issues with groups of people where the employment rates are not, they're not meeting the national averages. So our ethnic minority groups, women, our NEET cohort. So you can see there on page 40 where we do have some issues. But just to reassure the committee, there is lots of work going on. And I think probably the final thing I'd want to say is that, it isn't just about Liverpool City Council and our teams, supporting this whole agenda. As the city plan indicates, we have anchor institutions that we are working alongside, and they also have a big responsibility to support the council and to support us in moving and helping employers and businesses and young people and adults into work and into good work as well. And so, it is about working in partnership as well. So I'm really happy to take any questions, and if that's okay with the committee.
Thanks, Elaine. A very comprehensive report as always, but there may be some questions. Linny and Lilla, anybody else? No?
Barbara.
Alan? I need my long distance glasses on to see the back row.
Sorry, Barbara as well. Barbara? Me too. Okay.
I'll get my mic on. Thanks, Elaine. Great report, and it's great to have real life examples like Lovell so you can see what's actually happening. It makes it all feel a bit more real. Just in terms of the stuff around the looked after children, it would be good to sort of see what type of jobs they're going in terms of, like, you know, and also in those going on to education, how many of them have gone on to university, because that would be really something to celebrate their sort of journey in terms of the committee. And this might be a bit of a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I'm not sure what's still, I know we've got Careers Connect now, and obviously I know we've got Liverpool in work, and I work for the Career Service and the Jeff year, so but I'm not sure how much of the old Career Service is actually left. So what careers advice do kids get access to now in schools? I know some schools commission their own sort of careers advisors, but I'm not sure whether you can just have an appointment with a careers officer, where we used to have careers officers right across the city. That worries me if we don't, because I think I was a careers officer for 10 years and think it's very different to sort of general, and that worries me. And the no financial implication to this report worries me, when I know a lot of the stuff that supports all of this excellent work was European funded, and that is my biggest worry moving forward, that once ESF funding goes, where does that leave all the back work to support us getting these people into work? Sorry for the awkward question, but no financial implications worries me when I know what's on the horizon with us, with ESF.
Linny, that's my favourite question to Rob, and I'll let Rob respond about what's going to replace ESF funding, because I ask him every time I meet with him. With the careers thing, it seems to me, I'm still getting the grips with it, but the service kids get depends on what school they go to, which is terrible, isn't it? Particularly in a school system in Liverpool where the pathways are very unclear. If you don't want to go to sixth form, or your school doesn't have a sixth form, there isn't always a great deal of information about what happens next. Some schools do it well, some schools don't, and that's what the officer that Elaine mentioned early on in a report has been working on, and in some cases it's kind of like just part of PSHE for year 10s and 11s, so it's a teacher delivering, and it's to 30 kids at the same time. Do you know what I mean? It's not a service really, is it? I don't know if Elaine wants to say any more, but I know Rob will want to explain about the ESF stuff.
Thanks. Yeah, just to say that the test and learn that we are progressing, and we're working with Chamber of Commerce on that, and it's great to see Paul in the committee today. What we need to do is try and cohere the careers system through that, because you're right, there is careers officers in the schools that are nominated, and it's a mixed picture. You've also got some Careers Connect services in there as well, and then there's also the link between schools careers and then your post-16 careers, because kids are on a journey. So it's the connection between that, so that the SEN support plan, the EHC plan, all that rich intelligence travels through with the young person. So when they go into post-16, they stay on their course. There's good attendance, there's good retention, there's good outcomes. So it is part of the test and learn. One of the things we want to do is try and pull all that together, because it's really complicated, and I find it confusing as well. And I'm not in this, I'm post-16, but I can see that is something that needs to be looked at, definitely. So yeah, absolutely right to raise it.
Rob?
I can confirm that every time he sees me, Councillor Logan asks this question. We're waiting for an announcement on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the successor to European Social Fund, European Regional Development Fund, and the Agricultural Fund. I can't remember the acronym for that. There was some information announced in the 1 year spending review last November. That was the heads of terms, and we're anticipating on the 27th of October the Chancellor will announce some more detail in terms of the next steps. We have been absolutely blunt with government officials on this about the potential cliff edge in terms of service provision in April 2023. And I know Councillor, you've been involved with services, Councillor Bennett's been involved with services as well in the past, that, you know, we say this every time when programmes come to an end that we want to avoid a cliff edge. We've been absolutely clear with them that, you know, it's there is an opportunity to ensure that we avoid that cliff edge, but there's a need for pace over the next 6 to 9 months in particular. So yeah, we're in the hands of government on this, but we keep making the point.
Thanks, Rob. Rilla?
Thanks for your absolutely comprehensive report. I've just got a couple of questions, if you don't mind. It's really good that we're doing work with ex-offenders. You know, people come out of prison and unfortunately, you know, there's that circle where they end up back in prison because of the lack of opportunities, really, and employment is probably the best way to do that. I just wanted to ask a question about women ex-offenders. Is there anything specific you do with women? Because this mentions a laundry, but I'm assuming it's a male prison. So is there anything specific with that? And the other one was just to note, really, I was listening to the news. I think it was, I don't know whether it was this morning, the Conservative Party conference for My Sins. But they mentioned something about a particular new fund for 50 plus to get more 50 plus back into work. And as the cabinet member will tell you, it's probably one of my big beefs is, you know, the amount of people, because of the changes in the state pension age, who become more unemployable as furlough, you know, the impact of furlough changes as well, and universal credit as well. So I was just wondering, is there anything particular we're doing for 50 plus? Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that. So in terms of the work that we're doing around reducing reoffending, which is a system change piece, we are working with HMP Liverpool. It just so happens that that is a men's prison on Liverpool geography, but we're also working alongside HMP Old Course as well. Now, we've got a really strong partnership. So, for example, we're working with New Futures Network. They're like an employer gateway as well, contact. So through those links, we're making sure that we reach out to women and to other, you know, to other groups as well. And we're focusing on working with, I suppose the plan at the moment is to work with groups of employers and on a sector by sector base to give that, to myth bust about recruiting somebody with a criminal record. So that goes right across the board for all groups as well. So it is work in progress, and we are progressing that as well with our partners. In terms of the 50 plus question, yeah, we have our ESF Ways to Work programme. We work right across the board, and we do as much as we can to target, you know, those cohorts of individuals right across the city. Our adult learning contract as well, you know, we encourage, you know, older adults onto programmes, retraining as much as possible. So yeah, we're doing as much as we can really with those cohorts. It is difficult. We're very conscious of, you know, digital skills and retraining and, you know, job changing, because it's very, you know, it's at the moment, isn't it? People are coming out of one job, moving into another job. So we're doing our best to recruit, you know, individuals and older learners and older people in that sense. So yeah, And have I missed another question? Was there another one? Yeah, I mean, I think we work very closely with Rob and Combined Authority, so we are always on alert to programmes and funding and resource that's coming down the line. So yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I need to just check back in terms of what that is without not having a name to, because there's lots of initiatives coming through as well. So, but yeah, I'll check that one out.
Thanks, Laura. I remember, Elaine, when we visited, I think it was Newsham Adult Learning Centre. I'm sure they talked about a woman of about 70 that were helping to set up her own business. So I think because people no longer retire at a strict age, Lila, it's wide open in terms of if you want to do something, the support will be there for you. Not necessarily the funding, but the support. Can I just ask, because I noticed somebody coming at the back, is it October, right? Lovely that you're here, October. Can I welcome you to the committee? October will be our Jewish advisory member going forward, and you work at St. David's School? King David, sorry, got that wrong. And Peter, if you can note October's attendance, please. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. That I just noticed that you emailed me just prior to the meeting starting, but I only just picked that up. Thank you. Just see.
It's just lovely that we've got good representation tonight from our advisory members. Right, the next question, I believe, for Elaine was from Alan. Please, thank you.
So, steps can we take? We just do with the job. Lorry drive. Social care, which is expected. Which is thing on maybe at last essential.
Thanks for that. I think in terms of workforce sufficiency issues in general, and particularly at the moment, we've done a fair bit of work with our care sector, which is actually that's not a current. That's been in the situation for a long time, hasn't it? But our teams of staff work very closely with our strategic workforce colleagues in adult social care. We do a lot of work with employers around recruitment. So there's very, very practical work that we do with those individuals and those employers and businesses. So yeah, I mean, there's a fair bit of work going on in that sense. With hospitality, we've recently worked very closely with the hospitality sector leads across the city region and in Liverpool around, we, for example, have helped to prepare an ask to government via the upcoming comprehensive spending review, which is what we've put together is an ask for some resource to support, I suppose, a fund that helps people to apply for a job, but also stay in the job as well. So it's kind of like a hospitality boost, we've called it. So it's to encourage people to apply in, but it's also then to encourage them to stay in that job as well, and they get an amount of money paid to them up front and as part of the, say, 6 months into the job as well. So that's been an ask to government. That's a very practical thing that we've put in. In terms of the logistics, again, it's a difficult one for us. I mean, there's lobbying, isn't there? There's our strategic influencing role. And I suppose there are also things like the employment chart, the Good Employment Charter. Sorry, I've got that wrong. What's it called? The Fair Employment Charter that, is rolling out across the city around, and that does include terms and conditions and, being a good employer. So I suppose there's a package of things, really. I don't know whether anybody wants to say anything else.
I think, if I may, Councillor Murray, I think the issues you identify are well rehearsed. They're well known, and I don't think it's something, certainly in some of those terms and conditions, particularly for HGV, that we necessarily will solve overnight. I know government have written out to all recipients of HGV licences to encourage them to come back into that sector, whether they got that through driving lorries or driving fire engines, whatever that might be. I think they're trying to encourage people back in, and it will take us some time. Government has launched a funding competition to try and train some more HGV drivers, but that may well be the new year before we see those newly trained people coming through. I think there are some wider challenges that we need to look at, and clearly from an employment skills perspective, as Elaine has set out, there's some things that we are doing. Certainly on hospitality, in the first week in August there were over 40 pre-employment training courses for hospitality in the Liverpool City region. So we are doing what we can. Hospitality employers, and Paul may reference this more, are certainly saying that what they're missing is experienced people. Entry-level roles are quite easy. They can get lots of people coming forward for entry-level, but they're really missing experienced roles. And that's put down to probably two things. One, I think, as you rightly identified, that there are some EU migrants who've returned home. I think the second issue is people who have made personal choices to go with alternative careers over the last 18 months. So rather than waiting for hospitality to start up again, they've taken perhaps an office-based or an admin-based role, which also gives them more family-friendly hours as well. So I think those seem to be the two big factors that employers we're talking to are saying are some of the issues with hospitality. And whilst we can do what we can to try and help some of those entry-level roles, through sector-based work academies, as Elaine has mentioned, some of those pre-employment training programs, some of those more experienced roles are harder to fill in that respect, and it'll take us some time to get there.
Rob, would you like me to add to that as well, just in terms of the perspective? Thanks, Chair. In addition to that, it also links back to the talent pipeline work that we talked about earlier. So yes, in the immediate short term, entry level jobs can be filled very, very short notice, but you've now got this dual pressure of, as Rob says, 50 plus individuals with lots of experience who have decided that they want a career change because the conditions that they're working in aren't particularly desirable anymore. The irony is that that's actually stimulating wage increases at the moment in some of these professions, which is great. However, you've also got the attractiveness of the career and the ambition that we want to instill in younger people coming through the school system. And if they're seeing, as you say, the conditions in logistics or the conditions in hospitality as not being something to aspire towards, then that creates a massive problem for the industry going forward. And as we all know, I think it's 48% of business rate income come from generally hospitality sector businesses in the city. So there's a real collective requirement here for the private and the public sector to work together to ensure that some of these particular types of job roles within these sectors are desirable. You can forge a really positive career out of it, and the onus is on some of our members, some of our organisations, to adapt to these almost macroeconomic pressures to stimulate change. And it's actually where quality of employment will be an opportunity to attract the best and the brightest talent to those organisations. And I think our responsibility is to make sure that some of that change takes place, and young people in particular have access to them going forward. So it's a long-term solution required to a very acute short-term issue. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Paul. I think one of the things would be increase the pay, wouldn't it? That'd make it a lot more attractive. Do you need any more on that, Alan? Okay. You've got all the experts here tonight. Very good answers. Thanks everyone for that one. Tracy, can we take your question now, please?
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple of points really. One, just to concur with what people have been saying around careers and careers advice, and just want to add to that really around the equalities aspect, which is really key about representation and diversity. And then, you know, whilst I looked at race, I'm not just talking about race, looking at equalities across the agenda, it's really important. And to kind of lead in onto that then was just about the report itself, and to say that in future, can we start to have more equalities information around a lot of these programmes and projects? We've mentioned here around, you know, young people, employment, women, etc., which is really good. I was surprised actually there's nothing there around disability as well. But I just think it's important that when we look at these programmes and we look at these projects, that we look at the equalities information and the impact that we're doing as well, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. I can see Elaine's nodding because I think actually all of that is so important. We have to know where the benchmarks are to see if we're making progress, and we need it right across all of the characteristics, and I'm sure Elaine will take that on board. I think we had one more question from Angela, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Elaine, for once again a fantastic report. I think lots of us in the room of councillors realise that a lot of the problems that we see day to day in our wards and so on come from people not having access to well-paid jobs. So it's a really important piece of work that you're doing here. My question is just around the NEAT numbers that you gave us before. It's fantastic that we've reduced it down to 7.8%. I just wondered if we had a figure as well to go along with that percentage. It was about 1,000 people for 12.8%. I mean, you don't have to like work it out now for me, but if you could let us know what the figure is for NEAT numbers at the moment, and just what are we doing to bring the figures down even more? Have we got like anything in place, any more interventions that will bring our figures down to below 5%? Because when you look at 1,000 kids who are not in education or employment or training, it's quite eye-watering to imagine them in the city and not really knowing what they're going to be doing and how they're going to be able to progress their lives. So, yeah, I just want to know if we've got any additional measures in place to help bring down that number. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think I've put the figure in, haven't I? For our target is to get down to national averages, which is around about 5%. It fluctuates. The NEAT figures on a monthly basis, they fluctuate. So I think in the June figure we were 7.8%. Yeah, it's 7.8%, and that is above national average, which is around 5%. So we are reducing down. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so it's about 800 young people, maybe 780, 800 young people. I'm happy to get the exact figure to you if you need that. It's a concerted effort over the past couple of years. NEAT straddles a number of different departments within the authority and within children and young people's teams, youth offending teams. So what we've done over the past 18 months is really bring the whole teams together. We have reduced our not knowns, and we have Career Connect. In fact, we're reviewing some of the arrangements that we've got at the moment, actually, to drill down even further to get it right down below national averages. I think the work that I've talked about with the talent pipeline and the officer that we've just brought in, who will work alongside Paul from the Chamber and our schools, she will focus on the at-risk and the through schools, through the intelligence and the data that we get on a monthly basis and from our school census data. So she will use that to very much focus the work through the 12 schools and the test and learn on those young people. I think the work that we're doing with the virtual school, the virtual head as well, and the looked after young people as well. Wherever there's risk, young people with special educational needs on plans, we are very much more targeted now, the work that we do. So really confident that we'll get that right down, and again, very happy to bring back reports in the future in terms of the progress that we make.
Okay with that, Angela? Thank you. Thanks, Elaine. And can we agree Elaine's... Linny, sorry.
On that, I'm really impressed at the figures. Like, the bane of my life used to be destination follow-up when I was in the career service, because that was what we had to do, ring round, see where all the kids were, and that was primarily done by the career service all them years ago. So given that we've had COVID and you've been able to get them figures, has been really impressive. So I think in terms of bringing everyone together and getting that figure, because I wasn't going to swear, but I was going to say something inappropriate and remembered, but it's a hard job.
And we're making progress, and we will make more progress. Thanks, Elaine. And can we note the report, please, members? Thank you. Right, back on the agenda now, item 6, the Director of Education update. Jonathan, return to school in September, please.
Thank you, Chair. I won't go through all the report, but just to highlight some updates that have happened since this report was actually published. As the Cabinet members already mentioned, and Chris Price has mentioned, is that the number of cases are actually reducing. We've had a total of 466 cases reported in the past 7 days, compared to 542 in the 7 days prior. So as has already been mentioned, is that we're seeing a decline in the primary sector and more of a plateauing off in the secondary sector. The year group with the greatest number of actually positive cases is actually in year 11, when we actually look at it by age group. In terms of vaccinations, which is on page 15, is that the figures at the moment is that we're looking at around 50% of actually being given parental consent in order to have vaccinations in school, and that programme is actually being run by the school immunisation nurses by Merseycare. And then just in terms of attendance figures since September, is that the average attendance in Liverpool has actually held up quite favourably against national averages, is that the average for all pupils is 90%, which is exactly the same as national. For children with an EHCP in Liverpool, it's 85.5% versus a national average of 85%. Liverpool average attendance for children with a social worker is 86% against a national average of 83.9%. And Liverpool average for children eligible for free school meals is 87.8% versus a national average of 88%. So at this moment in time, notwithstanding all the challenges, is that school attendance is actually holding up very well. I suppose it's just to note that that's encouraging at this moment, given that Liverpool historically always lags significantly behind national average in terms of school attendance. So that is promising and encouraging, notwithstanding all the challenges that the return to school has actually given us. Also, what I've provided there on page 4, and obviously we'll be able to go into more detail in terms of the breakdown of exclusions, both permanent and fixed term, as we actually move on through the academic year. But one of the things that we've got to be cognizant of is that we can't provide any data that would break it down too much, that would enable a young person to be identified. So certainly we've had 2 permanent exclusions so far three permanent exclusions so far this academic year. 2 of those are on SEN support. Fixed term exclusions, we're currently standing at 56, and this will be something that Cabinet members has asked for, and I think certainly members of Select have asked for, is that we'll be reporting routinely on exclusion figures moving forward at each of the Select committees. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jonathan. Any questions for Jonathan, please? Liz? Anybody else? No? Liz, do you want to go? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Jonathan. I'm very pleased that there has been some plateauing on the secondary level of COVID cases, but I feel that everybody is battling against a government that wants to pretend that COVID is over, and that the real situation in schools is really rather different to that. I've got a number of things that I want to ask. First of all, how many schools have CO2 monitors, and do we have any data back from those that do? I know that within the pandemic terms, a reading of about 700 is regarded as acceptable, and some schools throughout the country are reading 1500 from their monitors. And it would be interesting to know what that situation is in Liverpool. I think it's also important to note that cases for secondary children on the 20th of September, according to figures by Independent Sage, are at the peak that they have been throughout the pandemic. So I think my sort of second question to you is that clearly there's been some real success with firefighting in those schools that have brought in additional mitigations, but would it not be sensible to introduce mitigations across the sector so that you're not doing as much firefighting, but it's more preventative in terms of getting those numbers down and keeping them down? And I think there's an obvious issue as the weather worsens and as we move towards winter, that ventilation in schools is going to be more of a problem than it is in the summer months, when people are quite happy to have the windows and doors open, and what measures are going to be in place for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Would it be possible to ask Chris Price, who actually manages all of this COVID for us in schools, so we'll probably be able to give a lot more of the granular detail that's being asked for.
Thanks, Chris. You want to go before or after Chris?
Just wanted to quickly say, sorry, the NEU, National Education Union, have been saying a lot about this issue with ventilation. As you've said, it's just not plausible to keep your windows and doors open once we move into winter. I mean, it's cold enough today, let alone when we get to December, January. So the unions are pushing for that. As far as last time I had the conversation, there wasn't anything promised from government about ventilation systems, as has happened in other countries. I don't know if Chris knows more about that specific point, but
yeah, to start on the CO2 monitors. So 8 of our special schools have received them up to date. Now, when we look at the schools who've got them in place, it's only the state schools who are receiving them from government. But we've got a lot of our new builds have already got CO2 monitors built in, and they've had them throughout the pandemic. The report I've had from the head teachers who've got them in, they haven't seen high levels of CO2 presenting in those buildings. Now, I need to say that they are in new build buildings, so they might be more efficient anyway around CO2. So we need to see how it pans out in some of the older buildings as well. So we need a good cross-section of understanding. To date, we haven't had anything which has been fed back, which has been an issue around high CO2 levels, but I'll look into more detail and I can feed back. The other questions around the mitigations. So what we're seeing around the mitigations in primary schools is when we see a spike and we add in the interventions, we are seeing a very quick reaction to the cases in that particular group. We've had a number of schools which we've put controls in for 2 weeks, and we haven't had any primary schools yet which haven't reacted well to those controls. Secondary schools, we're seeing a mixed picture. So with secondary schools, we're seeing probably about 50% of the schools which are reacting well to what we call our stage 1 mitigations, which are around enhanced ventilation, further enhanced cleaning, containing the group and not allowing it to spread through the schools. But we are seeing a good impact when schools introduce face coverings within communal areas. I would say the data side isn't strong enough at the moment to say strongly this mitigation or that mitigation is the one which is having the direct impact, but we are seeing generally ventilation and face coverings work well. When it comes to ventilation within the schools, there is a pilot taking place in Bradford at the moment around air filtration systems, and the point you made about the natural ventilation is one which we're monitoring very closely, because in the last week or two we have seen a drop in temperature, so we're keeping an eye on how that makes a difference. And at this point in time, the control is for a more proactive management within the school to increase ventilation. But as we get further into the autumn and winter, that's going to be more difficult, as you've described. So we are seeing how this pilot pans out, but we're not expecting any outcomes until December. So there is a lag there, and as Councillor Logan mentioned, we're waiting for further information around that to come to fruition, but we do foresee that being potentially an issue.
Thanks, Chris. Is that okay, Liz?
Yeah, thank you. Yes. So could I just ask one further follow-up, Chair? Is that okay? So obviously you're waiting for the data and what mitigations work and don't work. So is there any plans to sort of roll out mitigations in the meantime, or is it just a matter of waiting?
So there are certain things which we're allowed to do, and certain things which the Regional Commissioner's office aren't allowing us to do at this point in time, so we need permission to do them. So there's been an application from Public Health England to the RSC's office to ask about enhanced testing and to ask about additional mitigations, but that's gone through Public Health England North West to the RSC's office, and we're waiting for a reply on it. So at the moment, that's the route we're waiting for, to get a response to see if we can put additional mitigation in place.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. I have one question on the report, which was to do with the exclusions. I noticed the numbers are going down, which is great, but then it occurred to me, it's a very curious thing, that some of these fixed numbers are quite high, given pupils were barely in school for the last 18 months. I just wondered what the hidden story is behind these figures. Jonathan, please.
Okay, the most recurring theme for, or the most recurring reason for fixed term exclusion was persistent defiance, which was the one that was repeatedly reported. And also within there is that there was a specific logging of incidents that were related to COVID specific. So, for example, behaviours that were, I was trying to find the right word really, but behaviours that were not conducive to a COVID climate. So obviously that was a new measure in whereby there were a significant number of fixed term exclusions for that reason.
Can I just ask a follow-up on that? Were any of these fixed termed or permanent exclusions as a consequence of behaviour online?
No, not in the past academic year, there wasn't.
Thank you very much for that. I think we're staying. Oh, before we move on, can we agree the report, please, members? Yes, certainly.
Thank you. Sorry, just through Chair Jonathan, it was just to make that point really, and I guess it was for all reports in terms of equalities and equalities information. If you could have that. I take on board what Jonathan said, numbers were probably too low in this instance, but just for future reporting. Thank you.
Absolutely, I think exclusions, I like that box because it's quite simple, but I'd quite like another box underneath it with more detail in, just at a glance sort of information, showing all of that, because we need to know. We literally just need to be able to monitor it very closely. But thanks for the report, and can members agree to note it? Thank you. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Thank you. Apologies. Just on the COVID issue, just so members of the committee are aware, we're now starting to see some physical protests outside some of our schools around vaccination. So obviously Chris is supporting schools and providing advice, and if there's inappropriate behaviour, then obviously schools are reporting it to the police. But just, I know that previously there was some activity, I think, over on the Wirral. We're now starting to see that in Liverpool. Thanks.
Well, that's very disappointing, really, because we don't mind people protesting, but you shouldn't really do it on the doorstep of children, in my opinion. But thanks for that information. We have protesters here as well tonight. Okay, the next item is the written statement of action for send, which is a standing item. And can I ask Jonathan again to speak to this, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to reiterate Cabinet members' assertion at the beginning that while there have been improvements, there's still a long way to go, and hopefully that will be the not just the theme, but that's the feel that not only officers but also parents and the various stakeholders will actually feel. I think one of the things that I think is important just to raise to select as to where we think our significant challenges actually lie with regards the progress towards the written statement of action, and it's specifically around joint commissioning and the joint commissioning of therapies, because that's the most recurring theme that parents are certainly telling us that there's the issue with. It's the theme that schools tell us about those access to therapies, and it's also the biggest driver of children being educated out of borough. I think you remember probably it was in 3 select committees ago that I reported that almost £10 million is spent in out of borough provision for children with special educational needs, and that's obviously money that's being taken away from our Liverpool schools and our Liverpool special schools. And what was really clear from that is that the most recurring theme for that is around the lack of therapy and access to therapies within our mainstream and within our special schools. Obviously, we can't do joint commissioning on our own, and we are, very, very much reliant on relationships and also really robust processes with the clinical commissioning group. And I think this is an area whereby we've really got to up the ante. I think not in terms of up the ante and adversarial, but we've really got to get much, much tighter within our joint commissioning arrangements, because that's making sure that children actually get the support that they need at the right moment of time, and that children haven't got years or months to wait whilst we as professionals sort out the intricacies of who pays for what. We need to make sure that that gets into children as soon as possible. So that's one area that we are working with as a partnership to make sure that we get proper analysis of where services can be joint commissioned, but to make sure that there's actual parity and true joint commissioning, and not just one organisation or one entity saying that they will pay or not pay for certain things, but working together around the city's children. With regards from page 22 onwards, you'll see that the number of children within EHCP is beginning to rise quite significantly. At the time of writing this report, there were 3,837 children that were being maintained by an education, health and care plan. If we take that back to when Liverpool was inspected back in January 2019, that's an increase of 46% of children with an EHC plan. So it is increasing quite significantly. That number of 3,837 now is only 10 away short of 4,000 from when we actually wrote the report. So the number of children within EHCP is beginning to increase, is increasing quite significantly. I think what we need to be really clear about and really important about is that what we can't be doing in any of our approaches is it's not about reducing the demand for an EHC plan. That's the wrong argument altogether. What we need to be making sure is that children are actually getting the support they need at the right time and in the right place. You can see as well that the requests to assess are continuing to increase, and also the number of EHCPs is significantly increased as well, actually being issued. What I've provided for select there as well is that going right back to January 2019, that you can actually see the figures of the number of plans that were in the backlog. We peaked at 323. So they were plans that weren't completed within timescales. Pleased to report to Select Committee that as of today, there's only one plan in the backlog, and that was a plan that only went over by 2 days. So there's a significant improvement there. And for context as well, is that this is just doing what we should ordinarily be doing. This is not Liverpool being absolutely fantastic in its delivery. This is just making sure that we meet statutory timescales. And similarly, you'll see there the number of plans completed. What I've got on page, or what's presented to you on page 24, is that you can actually see the number that was in the backlog, the number of plans completed, and the number of plans on time. If we go back to November 2019, you can see there that we went to 0%, and again in April 20%. Sorry, in April 2020 to 0%. We finished around October this time last year at 9.7%. The figures in terms of statutory compliance as at the end of September was 94.6%. So that's a massive, increase in terms of timeliness. But again, just to reiterate, is that's us just doing what we should ordinarily be doing. That's nothing or no reason for adulation other than the fact that a significant amount of work has been done to get us to this place. Select also asked last time for presentation of the tribunal information, and that's provided on page 25 and 26, along with the reasons that are actually given within there. I think the one thing I would point out to Select in that is that in 2021, 71% of appeals were settled without the need of a hearing, which was where the local authority either withdrawn by a parent or the local authority concedes. And this is consistent with 74% of appeals settled in the 2020 calendar year. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Jonathan. Any questions for Jonathan, Linny? Anybody else? Linny, take the floor.
Sorry, just for the record, I've been tested. I'm coughing my way through. I've definitely not got COVID. I've just got a cold. So I was just thinking I'm coughing all the way through the meeting. I had a test before I come out. Brilliant, great figures. I think I was having a conversation about this earlier and just around perception, because it is something that, you know, we get hammered on in terms of this. Them figures are brilliant in terms of, I know what you're saying, it should be that anyway. It's not to celebrate, but what you've achieved has been great. One of the things that I've found, certainly with our residents, is it's not really us, or the biggest blame is a delay in diagnosis and stuff with health. So whilst we get all the flack for it, because it's a school issue and people, I think, feel more comfortable blaming the council than they do blaming health professionals. That's my view on this, because a lot of it, when you're speaking to them, well, I'm waiting for all day for a diagnosis, or I haven't had this, or I haven't had that. And I know we've got really good partnerships, but I think if they could be improved anyway in terms of this, that might stop some of the bad flack that we get in terms of from, you know, really distressed parents. I get that, but a lot of it isn't even the fault of the council, if that makes sense. Thanks, well done, great report.
Thank you, Councillor Hinnigan. I think that there are aspects regarding waiting lists that do cause issues. We've got very high waiting lists for ASD referrals, and we've seen the referrals for ASD go through the roof. I think one of the things that I was going to mention, that I think there's still areas where, as a local authority, as a city council, that we don't help ourselves, is communication with parents still needs a lot of work. And I think a lot of the time is that parents understand the situation if we just communicated with them better and let them actually know as we're going along through the process where we're up to, and where their child's plan is up to in the process, even where, for example, there are delays. But I think where, for example, the situation isn't helped is where it's always parents constantly having to ring the authority and authority officers up to ask where they're up to, where it should be the other way around.
Happy with that, Lily? Yeah. Thank you for your report, Jonathan. I couldn't agree more. I think that's actually the watchword for good customer services. Even bad news is better than no news at all when you're trying to work and create a good relationship. So thank you for the report, and can we note it, members, please? Thank you. The next report is the Oxwell survey feedback, and I believe you're talking to this, Chris.
I am. I came for this and I got drawn into COVID. So this is a survey which took place in the summer term, and I'll give a bit of background around the survey. It was Oxford University have been putting this, rolling this out for the last 5 years or so across the country in different counties. This is the first time that Liverpool has participated in the survey, and we had a very good uptake from our schools when going through it. The survey is a 200 to 300 question survey, so it's a very intense and very in-depth survey to look at mental health and well-being of children, and it was aimed at children in year 5 up to year 13. Now, uptake was different in different years, and I'll demonstrate that why as we look at the figures. But we had quite a few challenges when we rolled it out. So it rolled out in May and June last year of the last academic year, and it came at the time of our previously highest spike of COVID cases within school. So at any one point in time while this survey was taking place, we had 7,000 children in isolation as a result of being a contact of a COVID case within school. This made it difficult to have a bit of system, an approach within schools where the schools could get a run at putting the survey together. It also took place at a time which was out of our control, when year 11 and year 13 were not in education within schools, and the advice with it from public health colleagues was that we would have school support on hand in case any of the questions which were being asked provoked a negative response, so we could have a more systematic structure of support for the students. The previous surveys have been taking place mainly in southern counties of England. As mentioned, this is the first time that we took part, and we had 12,300 children who took part in the survey. Now, out of the 12,300, 11,693 children, their results after cleansing were valid results, and this was 85 schools from across the city, and it represented 28 out of 30 wards within the city. That's from the primary sector. From the secondary school sector, 22 secondary schools took part in it, and the 22 secondary schools would have children from all wards within the city. So this is the content of the survey and the different questions which were asked. Those in asterisks, or the asterisks behind it, are the ones which were asked for children in year 8 and above. So the ones without the asterisks were for all year groups, year 5, 6, 7 and upwards, whilst the ones with the asterisks were more sensitive questions. So after it went through an ethical process with Oxford University, they were more robust and more intense questions after the older age groups. So you'll see the participation levels across the board. So when we go through the data, there's a couple of health warnings around it. So you'll see the year 11 data, a very small sample size. So whilst data is presented in the graphs, I do ask you to take a bit of caution when we look at it. And also, when we look at the questions and look at the outcomes of the survey, there's a health warning around the moment of time we were in, which was higher COVID cases in the city and outbreaks in schools. So when we look about the anxiety and we look at the well-being levels, we need to take that into consideration. And part of the work to follow on this is to triangulate the information to get more robust outcomes. So when we look at this first slide, this is demonstrating the well-being, and this isn't Liverpool data, this is national data, and it shows a reduction in high well-being from last year's survey to this year's survey. So you can see across all year groups a reduction in high well-being and an increase in low well-being. Now, the reason why this is important is when we look at the Liverpool data and compare it to national, it demonstrates that we're broadly in line with national. So had we done the survey, taken part in the survey last year, there would be a high confidence that our well-being of high well-being across our students in the city would have dropped dramatically, as it has done across the country. One of the key elements which we're pulling out of the data is looking at the RCADs. Now, the RCADs is a 47 question questionnaire, which creates a scale of anxiety and depression. Now, what we're seeing here is we're broadly in line with national average, but slightly higher across all levels. When we look at the information in the subscales, we can see with some of the outcomes around depression is higher than anxiety. Now, our first thought process would be anxiety would be higher, particularly with COVID being high and apprehension of going back to school. But it seems that it's a further deep-rooted problem and higher levels of depression in Liverpool. And you can see that the levels of depression in our children are high across the board in all year groups. One of the key findings around it, and this is one of the things we're looking at against academic outcome, is the ability to concentrate now from compared to before the pandemic. So some of the additional work which the university is looking at are the impact of cognitive function and the impact of that against schoolwork and the impact that might have against COVID. What we can see is as the age groups increase, we can see that the children find it more difficult to concentrate. So this is a moment in time during the pandemic, but we are looking at how long this information lasts for, and we'll do the survey, we'll revisit the survey next year and to see whether this is something which is sustained or a moment in time because of the difficulties with COVID. There were questions around bullying, and one of the things we're looking at, which was quite significant, is whilst comparatively low the elements of bullying in all year groups decreases across the age groups, any bullying in schools is an issue, which is something which we need to look to tackle. But something which has come out which is quite significant is how students perceive bullying within schools. So if we look at the data comparatively in years 9 and 10 of how many children identified as being bullied sometimes or often, and compare that to how they perceive the school of handling bullying in school, you can see that only 22% in years 9 and 10 thought that schools were handling bullying well, whilst when we look at the data, 7 and 5% respectively, children were being bullied sometimes or often. So there's an additional piece of work to look at perception of bullying and the narrative around whether being bullied or seeing someone being bullied has an equal impact on a child. The data pulled out elements around loneliness and belonging and allows us to see that whilst broadly in line with national average, we're still seeing that there's an unacceptable amount of children who feel lonely often, and an even greater number of children who are sometimes or often. So it's a work we need to look at around belonging within school and how children are accepted within school. And then some of the work which Oxford are looking into in a bit more detail is sleep anxiety and children not being able to sleep because they feel anxious. Now there's further information to look at against gaming and online usage, but what I wanted to draw attention to here is whilst we're broadly in line with national average on the sleep anxiety, when you put a mirror to children's low well-being, you can see as children as lack of sleep or sleep anxiety increases, so there's low well-being. So there's additional work to go into to look at that, to look at the links between the two. One of the big things which we're pulling out of the survey is where children go to for support around well-being and mental health. And what's coming out of it quite strongly is children are turning to substantive members of staff within a school setting, so whether it be the head of year, the school counsellor or a teacher. So what we need to look at are the children, where they go to, and how we skill up and support those people within school to try and support the young people, as opposed to just going to external providers. The data on exercise can be pulled out in one of two ways. We can look at the positives, that on average about 40% of children are doing at least 6 hours of physical activity a week, or we can look at the negative, that 60% aren't. Now, when I've looked at previous data around exercise and physical activity, I would say that the figures we're looking at here are higher than I've seen in other studies which are being conducted by Sport England, whilst the sample size is much higher in this study. But what we can look at is how we are comparative to before lockdown, with 50 to 60% are doing more, but approximately 25 to 30% are doing less. Now we can look at that in either of those lenses, but if we look at where we've got work to do, there's work to do with 60% of the children who need additional support to do more physical activity, and particularly the 30% who are doing less across the ages compared to before lockdown. The data which I've just presented is high-level data, and as I mentioned at the beginning, there's 200 to 300 questions within the data, and we'll receive a platform called the LowSeek platform from Oxford University, which will allow us to triangulate the information, so we can look in a lot more specific detail and to look at causal effect of some of the outcomes. And the purpose of that is to allow us to see and to monitor the interventions we put in place against the impact of them. We'll be doing universal and targeted training for schools around the outcomes of the survey. Every school who participated in the survey will get their own report, and they'll get their own access to the LowSeek platform. From a city perspective, we'll be looking at the data and looking at how we can work up initiatives and look at existing initiatives to try and monitor it and create resources for all schools in the city, including the ones who didn't take part in the survey. We'll be looking at the work of schools with children waiting for Tier 3 or Tier 4 mental health services. So whilst we know that the waiting time for these services is increasing, the children who need to access the services are still hopefully attending school. So we need to support schools to support these young people, not in a clinical intervention, but in a supportive way. Looking at the COVID Recovery Fund from Public Health, we'll be working with them to look at self-harm and reducing suicides. One of the slides which some of the data which the slides didn't show but is in the report is that 6.3% of the children in year 8 and above who took part in the survey identified as having self-harmed in the month leading into taking part in the survey, which is quite a high number of young people. So we need to look at specifically around self-harm. Eating disorders is one of the issues we're seeing a lot of at the moment, and how we can help support reduce suicide of young people. I mentioned before in the survey about bullying and the perception of bullying and the prevention of it, and then working with our SEND team to look at SEMH in schools and look at specific links between SEND and mental health. We'll be working with the PE School Sports and Physical Activity Group to look at how we can increase programs around resilience and engagement, to look at that belonging, and look at interventions such as forest schools within schools, and look at the different models which are across the world and how they can be supported. And then look at our systems of tracking what's going on. One of the things which has been highlighted from this survey is the lack of in-depth information we have around mental health and well-being within schools. So we need to look at building upon this to track the outcomes of the survey, so we can see the impact of the interventions we put in place. And then the final thing we're looking at is around nutrition, mental health and metacognition, and creating a systematic approach through the PSHE curriculum, which will be piloted through schools this side of Christmas, and then it'll be rolled out after the Christmas holidays. So open to any questions.
Thanks, Chris. That was a great report. Linny's hand up and Liz's hand is up. Linny first, please.
Sorry. Do you know that at the beginning when you gave us 22 wards took part and 28 wards took part and said, is there any wards that didn't take secondary and primary that didn't take part at all? Because thinking of Tracy's equality stuff, if there's wards within the city that we've got, you know, no data for at all, that's quite significant in terms of the survey and the results. So I think there was 8 primaries that hadn't took part, or two secondaries and 8 primaries. Were they from the same ward? If that makes sense.
So there are 2 wards which had no schools who took part in the survey. So from a primary school perspective, where they take in children from the local community, then there's a high confidence that there isn't data for those particular wards. For a secondary school, it's less obvious. As Councillor Logan mentioned before, there's not a secondary school in every ward, but there is secondary representation from all wards in our secondary schools. We've got good confidence levels of city representation within the data we've collected, but not necessarily ward-specific data. What we'll look at doing is looking at one of the sections on the questionnaire was around demographics, and we'll be triangulating the information of the outcomes against the demographics, and then that should help us to have an understanding of the interventions which might take place to help all wards within the city. Does that make sense?
it would be good to sort of have that broken down, because it might be able to, for us as ward councillors, determine what services are needed, you know, in youth. Or I know, like, lots of kids in Speak, where I live, go to school in Halewood, so we're not going to have the data for them. So I just think maybe we need it broken down a little bit more, if possible.
Yeah, one of the benefits of the Low Seeker platform is it will allow us to do this. Now, it won't go down to ward level data, because we know that representation from the schools, but it will allow us to look at the demographics and to help councillors to have a look at that information as a city representation and how that impacts on individual wards. So we will be looking at that data to try and draw down in our best way.
Thanks, Chris. Liz, would you like to make your question, please?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Chris. It's just regarding whether we have any additional detail, or whether that's going to come when we can log into the load seeker, regarding the 7% of children who feel unsafe in school, and whether they're from a particular community. Are they part of the LGBT community? Do we have that level of detail, or can we hope to get that? Thank you.
So the survey was an anonymous survey, and individual results will be hidden as a result of that, but there will be school-specific data. Now, one of the elements of caution is around how individuals feel safe in school at this period in time, because there's a number of different things we need to look at. So when we look at one of the things, because of being close to the COVID data, I've noticed the schools with high levels of COVID at the point in time where the data was, the survey was taken part, were showing higher levels of feeling unsafe in school. So we need to look at the different elements of the survey, such as bullying, such as self-harm, etc., and cross-reference them against the safety within school to try and identify whether that was a result of COVID bullying or other factors. What we'll also have is a representation of the demographics within that school as well, and that should give us an idea of whether there are any issues or any links between the demographics and those safety elements. What we can't get down to is the specific detail of an individual who is from a certain community or representing a certain group and the outcomes of their survey. So that's the limitations of it.
Tracy, do you want to ask a question? Yeah, thank you. Thanks, really interesting report. Just a bit of clarification, please. In terms of the analysis, and I realise that there's more analysis to come, are you able to break down the type of bullying? Because there's a lot of things that come under the heading of bullying, isn't there? I'm just very aware that racism and racist incidents come under bullying. So are you able to break that down in respect of that? And secondly, is it the university that's doing the data analysis?
Yeah, so we can break down the bullying and the type of bullying. So one of the benefits of the survey is that they're the headlines which I've just presented. It was 300 questions, and through the Low Seeker platform, we can look at the specific questions and the outcomes of that question. The university have collated the results to give what I would say a user-friendly summary of what's going on in the city. But both the schools and ourselves can look at the data and analyse it in further detail. Over the next 12 months, we'll be working with the university to look at the data and to look at specific interventions and how they might have an impact on creating a change around some of the outcomes of the survey. And they will work with both ourselves as a City Council and with the individual schools who took part in the survey. So the secondary schools with more details, the primary schools with more clusters.
Thanks, sorry, I just, one more point I hadn't finished. And you mentioned there about demographics and wards. Can you just clarify that for me? So in terms of the breakdown of demographics, and that's really important that we understand that. But we're just aware that children cross the city to go particularly to secondary school. So will that skew the figures or anything, or will that be taken into account?
No, the way they set the questionnaire up or the survey up is in a way which gives us an understanding of what's going on within the city area, and compare that to the national. So when I look at the ward data, that's my way of sharing information with yourselves as to what representation of schools took part within the survey. When we look at the demographics data, it needs to be non-identifiable demographics. So the questions which were asked in a way where the child couldn't be identified from the outcome of their results, but it allows us to have an understanding. For example, if a child lives in, I'll use the term council housing, that we know that the children in council housing, and we can compare that data with the anxiety levels or depression levels or the well-being levels. So then there's an understanding from that type of demographic.
Thank you. Happy with that reply? Okay. I think it's great because it is the benchmark. Steve, you have a question, please?
Yeah, just a couple of quick points really. First of all, there is a really positive piece of work to think about. Over 12,000 young people in the city filled it in, so it is something we really need to listen to. And talking to Chris as well about the steps that are going to be taken to make sure we communicate back with the young people the outcome, so that's going to be in place. I think the other link is the Health and Social Care Select Committee heard about the level of demand for services for children with mental health issues, and the conclusion there really is that significant investment is needed given the level of demand and waiting list. And the final observation, and talking to Jonathan about this today, is that some of the stuff earlier in the agenda today about aspiration for young people and showing them what their future is going to be in terms of employment, skills and opportunity is part of how we tackle some of this as well.
Thanks for those observations, Steve. I have one further observation, which is one I keep coming back to. And I did notice that all the children sort of report they're most likely to speak to someone in a school setting. I have real concerns about staff who are not clinically supervised, picking up lots and lots of cases. And I just think the investment needs to be such that we look at that very clearly and get some more expertise helping within the school setting, because I just don't think it's fair on school staff to be picking up all of these issues. I was quite overwhelmed by the numbers. The other, quickly, I would say, is, and we discussed it before the meeting, is there was something quite wrong about the 95% of children not being concerned or not being affected by bullying. I don't know how you read that. And then 45% saying schools weren't handling it well. I know you brought that out well in your presentation, but I think that's one we really need to pick at and get to the bottom of. And I would pick up on something Tracy said as well about bullying. What do we mean by bullying? Because it looked like less bullying as you got older, but we're aware of so much other stuff going on, especially gender-based stuff. And maybe young people don't perceive that as bullying, but it's a type of bullying. So I think it's a great start. And finally, because now I'm taking over this, I just want to point out that Liz is heading up our scrutiny panel on this, Chris, so she may need to talk to you outside of this meeting about some of this, because this is a great starting place for her to do that piece of scrutiny. Yeah, thanks everybody on that one. We have now item 10, which is the travel training for young people, which is a motion from Liz, but understanding that that matter's being addressed. Who's speaking to this, please? Tom? Yes. Thank you.
The motion asking for travel training to restart, that it did restart on the 7th of June. There is a backlog because obviously there's catching up with it being paused, but it has restarted already. And there's mitigations in place in terms of COVID, but things have started again.
Can I just add to that as well? When we were discussing this in our pre-meeting, we were all of the opinion this is really valuable training for young people, and we were going to support the motion, Liz. So good news. And Tom, can you keep us posted on that, because we do really need to see that up and running fully again, please. Right, item 11. I'm looking at the time. Oh dear. Scheme. Any questions on this, please? No, I have one question, Steve. There's one in there about +Dane providing training. I think it's employment training. I just wonder why and where. Thank you. To approve a continued contract with +Dane Housing for the council to deliver employment and skills services on behalf of tenants and residents in +Dane neighbourhoods. I just don't know why they don't pay for it themselves, to be blunt.
They fund us to do some bespoke work with their tenants, so we're receiving funding from them. Yes, yes, positive. No.
Right, so the scheme of delegation is accepted and noted. The work programme update, I can advise I will be meeting with directors and lead officers to update the work programme in the coming weeks, and I think we've picked up a couple of points here tonight. We'd like to have the reps from LivePack maybe to sit in on the send item with Jonathan and the cabinet member. And hopefully, if Tracy's report has gone through cabinet and everything else, she may be able to do something for us, the presentation on the 11th. I think that's the date of the next, 10th, sorry, the 10th of November is the next meeting, 5 p.m. in this venue, and it's 5 minutes past 7, but we did start at 5 minutes past 5, so it is 2 hours on the nail, everybody. And can I thank you all for attending? I think it's been a good meeting, and